Well, here we go. This is another budget home studio video, and there's been some requests for further discussion on the economy. It's getting very, very confusing at this stage. Not that we didn't really predict that that's what would happen, become harder and harder for people to work out what was going on. So we have a mix of drivers now. We have a global economy in fairly deep recession, some call it a depression, and we have behind that two major factors, the earthquakes in Japan and here in New Zealand. There's been others, of course, but that's altered the whole of the financial structure in terms of the insurance industry, banking and finance, and then beneath those two really quite pressing shake-ups is the whole unattended issue of post-peak oil. And of course around the world, as economies move into recession and further problems take place, people look for scapegoats. And that's a sort of natural human thing to do. I finished looking at, for I think about the third time, Too Big to Fail, which is a kind of film documentary about the financial crisis, all the toxic debt that was being moved about and how people were trying to resolve the issue, the incredible problem of containing greed. You've got chief executives all around the world who are living well beyond the means of the ability of communities to sustain. I mean, let's face it, these people who are getting huge bonuses from the banks, effectively what takes place is the whole of the system functions on the basis of socializing losses and privatizing profits. So I don't think there's hardly a country, I can't hardly think of a country in the world where you've actually got a true democracy, majority rule, minority protection, and sharing the benefits. I don't think too many countries have actually reached that stage. So we talk about democracy, but we just don't practice or live in them. And of course it's convenient when it's put to people who make commentary on political issues. Well, democracy is difficult to define. What does it mean? And so forth. And in actual fact, it should be fairly simple in terms of its basic components, as I've said: majority rule, minority protection, sharing the benefits. We've just got ourselves kind of deeper into the crisis that began in the First World War, with the First World War, the shortage of resources. The Second World War came about as a consequence of those fundamental issues still not being resolved. They were issues of democracy, majority ruling, protecting minorities, and sharing the benefits again. So a fundamental problem of human nature. And it's quite complicated actually when you start to get out from the core, because to understand the complexity emanating from some rather simple things but moving to the outside, if you like, you need a fair amount of education. And only with education comes the insight and the understanding that there are certain things that are not tolerable in so-called democratic societies, and the inequity that's actually developed is a massive powder keg waiting to explode. I mean, at the time of the French Revolution, there was a redressing of the balance, and so, you know, people were privileged and so forth lost their heads. Look, if you oppress people enough, and they feel as if there's nothing to lose, and we're seeing examples of this, you've really got to understand that when somebody drives a car into a centre of a city, it's loaded with explosives, and it's detonated, and they kill themselves as well as whoever else is around in the vicinity of that explosion. That's really, you know, people saying, look, we haven't got anything to lose. It's not working here. And wherever we go, if there's an afterlife, it's got to be better than this. It can't be worse. That's kind of like, you know, my core insight into why people behave the way they do, and it's not understood. Or if it is understood, it's deliberately ignored. So there's this gigantic battle for ascendancy which is taking place. I guess in a way it always has, being part of the system of the authority structure. Look, let's just call it quits there. We're going to pick this up later, but this is kind of, you know, like returning to a subject that we haven't talked a lot about. But I mean, there is no relief in sight for a recession. We have overshot our carrying capacity as a planet. These issues are not being addressed by our political leaders, and so in that context there is no solution, and that's really sad.